The Referee's a podcast with Jack and Kelly too. Scottish Championship class, they give us the show. Footy tales from the pitch, controversies they scratch. Every moment they'll itch, no call left to batch.
Here we go again. We're back. It's the Referee's a Podcast, episode 3 of season 3. Jack Curry with me as always. How are you, Jack?
Oh, I'm very well, Cammy boy. I'm very well. Really excited to get this week's episode underway, Cam. We've really had it all, haven't we? From an exciting League Cup campaign, transfer window still opening, league action returns. There's a lot to get through in this hour.
It's true. Yep. It's big stuff's been happening. Obviously, as you mentioned there's been some games going on. Premier League Sports Cup, where there was still some championship teams in contention, pushing on and doing their bit to promote the championship a wee bit further in this competition. However, we'll start off on the Friday night games. I think. What would you say? Friday night game. You and I watched this.
We did, and that's what I was going to touch upon, Cam. What a Friday we had.
Yes.
I mean, that Friday, listeners, was a day off for me. So I'd booked the Friday off in advance, and Cam, I'm going to tell the listeners all about my day. I got up, listeners, went for a spa,
nice.
The sauna, steam room, went for a big brunch, massive big stack of pancakes, and to round it all off, me and Cammy boy went out for a Chinese buffet. Cam, we're going to plug it, Beijing Banquet. In Rutherglen, it was 10 out of 10, wasn't it?
It was good. It was good. Obviously, crazy walking in initially. Very grandiose entrance with water fountains, with smoke machines, etc. Then you walk down the sort of goldeny hallway, and it opens out into quite a communist-looking room with all tables stacked out in like rows, and the food down one side. It was a bit of a surreal experience, but it was delicious. Certainly worth a
really was an experience, wasn't it?
A big selection
really
as well for a buffet. It was massive.
Yeah, thoroughly enjoyable. So, listeners, if you're in and around the Glasgow area and you fancy a Chinese buffet, then we recommend. And to top it off, Cam, we came back to yours. Big online Football Manager session with a few of our other pals, and we got to watch the Kilmarnock Ayr game as well. And what a game it was. 5 goals at Rugby Park, a crowd of over 11,000 in Kilmarnock. I mean, it's truly spectacular, and we'll get on to the game, and some of the goals were absolutely spectacular. Ross Taylor, my God, one of the strikes of the weekend. And then on the flip side, Cam, you've got the absolute clanger from Harry Stone at the end to give Kelly the win. Yeah. How would you just sum up what was a truly mad Ayrshire derby?
I thought Ayr were quite unlucky in the end. Obviously, we've all presumably seen the mistake that they've made right at the death of the game. It's it was pretty heartbreaking to watch, but you couldn't help but sit and laugh at how absolutely ridiculous it was. It's really tough because they did play well, and they did, at 2 each, it felt like they did deserve it. So for them to concede that goal in the manner that they did, it's just a tough one to watch. So they done well, but Kilmarnock are in the Premier, so they are presumably that little bit better, and it home advantage, like you say, 11,000 in attendance. I don't know how many Ayr fans there would have been, probably a fair chunk, but you've got to imagine most of that is Kilmarnock fans, and they've spurred their team on to keep going to the last minute, and that's maybe the difference in the level. They're able to just go that little bit longer and keep the pressure on.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on it. I think there was a real sizable Ayr United crowd in there. I'm pretty sure they sold out that end behind the goal. So, but massive props to them for doing that. And we love to see the championship clubs being represented by such fantastic support. And I'm sure Gary Naismith and all those behind the scenes at Ayr United will hope maybe just a few hundred of them will stick on for some more of their league games at Somerset Park for the rest of the season, because I think for Ayr United, that's one of the things they've been trying to build is the attendance and the infrastructure and everything off the club is as much on it. So hopefully for Ayr United's sake, some of the fans will choose to stick around. But back to the game, Cam, it's Ayr United's first defeat of the season, in all competitions.
Yep.
They had such a spectacular League Cup group stage, followed by a really, really solid start at home in the league to Arbroath with a win and then away to Dunfermline with a point. Just how much do you kind of feel as though Ayr shouldn't really be despondent about this kind of defeat? You've already touched upon it against a Premiership opposition away from home, and they can still harness what really has been a positive start under Gary Naismith.
Definitely, no, they're certainly doing well. They played well and they were unlucky to a team in a higher division. So no, I don't think there's anything to be worried about from an Ayr perspective. And like you say, especially if they can bring some of those fans that have come along for the cup journey back to the home games at the very least at the championship level as well, get a few more people through the turnstiles and a wee bit more money into the club, and they can keep on going further and further, and hopefully well, maybe not hopefully because we're supporting two different teams in the same league, but back to where they were at least a couple of seasons ago, starting to push on again. And at the moment it looks like they've sort of recaptured the fire that they lost last year and towards the end of the season before as well. So no, it certainly seems to be going well so far under the new manager.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is, and I think we were very rightfully so, Cam, was very critical of Scott Brown during his time at Ayr United. There was a number of alarming things from the outside looking in, whether that was chopping, changing of the goalkeeper pretty much every game, chopping, changing of formation pretty much every game. When we often picked up on that Scott Brown never truly knew what his best Ayr United team was. When I look at the Ayr United team that started there, and you then look at what they had on the bench, has Gary Naismith already figured out what his best team is?
I mean, it certainly looks to be the case. It's a good squad of players there. They've done well in sort of bringing it all together, and like you've just mentioned there, has he just finally found his best squad? It does sort of look like it. The thing that took Scott Brown his entire tenure and didn't manage to find out, Gary Naismith might have done very, very quickly. I suppose it shows the difference between an experienced manager and an inexperienced manager potentially. Obviously Scott Brown not having too many games under his belt before arriving, maybe started reasonably well but dropped off fairly quickly and never quite recovered. But Gary seems to be hitting it at pace, and he's seemed to do the business so far. We'll see what happens as the championship season continues.
Absolutely, Cam, absolutely. And I think that's probably the perfect place to part Ayr United for just now. And then that takes us on to the sole Saturday fixture involving a side in our league. And it was the real shock, Cam. The first of the real shocks, if you would like, that happened here. And that was Dunfermline falling out to League One Ross County. Obviously Ross County, as we all know, back-to-back relegations. So, it's not a traditional League One club that Dunfermline were coming up against, but just how much of a shock was that for you when you saw that result coming through at 5 o'clock?
It was not what I was expecting. Obviously, Ross County, especially getting that late goal to clinch it. But Dunfermline hadn't equalised not too long before, so you were looking at it most of the game, thinking, what's going on there? Dunfermline are going to have to start scoring at some point. Then they concede that first one. You go, it's a rough day at the office, and they didn't manage to turn it around. Ross County coming, taking all the points away all the way back home with them. So, fantastic for them. I'm noticing there an assist for Jack Turner on his triumphant return to Scottish football. So nice to see him there popping up with an assist for the first goal. But certainly an upsetting one for Dunfermline. We've been thinking they've been doing pretty well, and this season particularly looking to maybe kick on a little bit. That's not a good sign for them in the cup, to be losing to Ross County at home, no less, in front of 3,500 fans, and probably some unhappy fans.
Absolutely, and I think, to be fair, Cam, one of the most unhappiest men in East End Park was Neil Lennon. I caught a wee bit on Saturday. We got on to, obviously, Thistle's game was the Sunday this week, so I was actually listening to a bit of Sports Sound on BBC Scotland on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
Caught the start of the Dunfermline Ross County game, and the pundit, whoever it was that was at the game, said that Ross County could have been 3-0 up after the opening 10 minutes. I think Brian Graham had missed a couple of glaring chances, which, listening to him on Super Scoreboard on Monday, I think it was, he said he should have buried them. And listening to Neil Lennon's comments when I picked that up, is even reading them here just now, Cam,
Yeah.
apologising to the supporters, describing that Ross County with a hungrier team, and that basically his team are not good enough at the moment.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty damning words from
Yeah.
Neil Lennon. And I think the interesting thing was, and we certainly picked up on this at the start of the season, or at least expressed our opinion on how much the media had bigged up Dunfermline last season, and how maybe this is a wee bit closer to reality than probably what the overall picture was being portrayed of them.
Right, I see. Yeah, no, I hadn't seen these comments, so it's certainly interesting to hear from him, and saying, it's quite damning report of his own team. Is it maybe a case that they've not come back in top condition after the break that we've all just had there? Are they not quite performing as he hopes? Did they maybe not kept to their diets over the winter and put on a bit of poundage or something like that? Certainly unfortunate to hear, or for the players to hear that from their manager. So I wonder if that'll be the kick up the arse that they need to crack on and continue to be what we expected them to be going into this season.
Yeah, definitely, because we both had them, I think I'm right in saying, third in our predictions, but I kind of feel as though I never seen Dunfermline as being a challenger to the title, if that makes sense.
100%.
In terms of, I think when you listen to other media outlets speak about Dunfermline, they have them right up there with Thistle and Livingston. But I do think there is a quite clear gap this season between perhaps what will be the top two and everyone else.
Yeah, I agree with that fully. I think it's going to be a race between two, and then the fight for the remaining two playoff places. It's a bit like it was last year, and to some degree most years ends up being two teams duking it out up at the top. But I don't see Dunfermline quite in that same pegging, but I did see them at a higher level than I saw them as last year. So they'll be hoping that this is just a blip, and it's back to business as usual. On was it Saturday that they're playing? Yeah, they're the Saturday games.
Yes, Saturday it is indeed. So yeah, exactly that. Dunfermline do go crashing out the cup, but still early on in the season and still plenty of time for them to turn it around. But that then leads us on, Cam, to very unusually a Sunday involving three fixtures on our side.
Yeah.
And we'll start off in Edinburgh at Tynecastle, because it turned into, I was going to say, a great match. It was really a truly fantastic second half, Cam, with Hearts going in 1-0 up at the break before running out 6-2 winners in the end with a whopping 7 goals in the second half. Unbelievably, Inverness were leading 2-1 at one stage.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen it, Cam, but Alfie Bavage's goal was unbelievable. It was a great flowing
cracker. Yeah.
Oh, wasn't it? Sweeping counter-attack move, rounding the keeper. I just even loved the finish and the fact that he put it behind the Hearts defender, and the limbs or the scenes, whatever you want to call it, from the away end were just brilliant as well. And then obviously, Hearts do what they do, and they go on and score 5 goals, and they make it look really comfortable by bringing on guys like Claudio Braga and flexing their muscles, and James Wilson, who had his spell at Tottenham last year. So I think on the day, Inverness can probably not really have any complaints, but despite the scoreline, have probably done themselves quite proud.
100%. You look at the Hearts lineup that started the game. They've obviously taken a few players off and playing a few second string players to a certain degree. Coming up against the lower league opposition, opportunity to get minutes in the legs. But yeah, when it's not been going right, you see that. One change at half time, 3 at 59 minute mark, and then obviously the floodgates start to open after that point. And in the end, it looks very, very comfortable. But I think you'd agree that in the 56th minute, it probably was not going to feel very comfortable at all. I can't think of the name of the new Hearts manager. It's a European
Wouter
fellow.
Franken.
Wouter
Wouter
Franken.
Franken.
Yeah, no, I was never going to get that. He would have been sweating there for a wee minute. Maybe had to take his tracksuit top off and stuff, but he brought on the cavalry, and they've done the business. So fair play to Hearts in the end. Unfortunate for Inverness. The fans would have certainly been sitting there at that moment thinking, can we do this? Look at this. We're actually ahead. We're winning at Tynecastle. Is this going to be the most historic day in recent memory of the club? No, not quite.
No, absolutely. And touching upon managers there, we've spoken about Wouter Franken there coming in at Hearts, but I want to actually touch upon the Inverness manager, Scott Kelleher. He was brought in, Cam, after the real awful period of Duncan Ferguson, and that really, really, really was a bad time for Inverness. They were in
Yes, it
financial
was.
difficulty. The football on the pitch was poor, and they ended up in League One, and there was a real fear for their future. Scott Kelleher, had zero managerial experience before stepping into the role at Inverness. This is his first and only job in professional football. He's gone on to not only lead them to promotion out of League One with the club being on a stable footing, they're now looking in and they're looking up this season. It's not just like, Inverness are going to come in and they're going to be hanging on, and if they stay up, then that'll be amazing. He's got them out the League Cup group stages. He's got them solid back in the Championship, and they've gave Hearts a decent game at Tynecastle. Should Kelleher be getting a wee bit more praise for the work he's doing up there?
I mean, I think to be fair, he's getting a good amount of praise. How highly the bookies, for instance, are rating Inverness this year. In the start of the season, certainly having them looking quite good. 4th, 5th in the league, which I think initially, thinking of them coming up, you think, okay, maybe they won't do so well. They won't be maybe quite the same Inverness team that went down initially, but they seem to have done very well. They've moved in the market very well. They've improved, and they are looking pretty solid so far this year. So don't get me wrong, it's early days, so we'll wait and see how they continue to get on, if that's as they mean to go on, essentially. But they seem to be certainly pulling it together for the time being, and obviously that result doesn't look so pretty, 6-2, but it's a tough game, anyway about it. But to be leading, partially the way through the second half, that's pretty good.
Yeah, definitely. So I think they can hold their heads up pretty highly, and the fans would have enjoyed their day out.
For sure.
And then there was one more game taking place in Edinburgh, involving my side, Thistlecam.
Yeah, take it away.
And we had a we had a fairly lengthy discussion about what I'll get onto before the podcast started. But as I always do, I'll give my very, very fair and balanced opinion about the game. For the first 20 minutes, Thistle were crap. We were absolutely awful, and really didn't find our feet at all in the game, to be fair. I think Alex Ray last night in Super Scoreboard kind of described the performance for the first 20 minutes as maybe players being a bit scared, maybe being a bit overwhelmed by the situation and the environment we were in, and ultimately Hibs found themselves a goal up from an excellently worked move and good finish by Owen Eldon at the back post. But after the first 20 minutes, Cam, Thistle really, really grew into the game, and it was a very, very kind of level game for the rest of the first half. But what I would say is Thistle completely dominated the second half, and I think that is actually shown in the possession stats, where we kind of unbelievably had 60% of the ball throughout the game. Now, obviously, there is only one stat that matters, but for the second half, I was so proud of Thistle's performance. Not scared on the ball, going forward. We created numerous chances. Salinger and the Hibs goal, you would have to say, had a good game, made a couple of good saves. Probably, saves you would, overall expect him to make, but still really solid saves. I would say Ben Stanway missed a really good chance from a header, but I've waited long enough, Cam. The elephant in the room, quite clearly, was the penalty situation. Now, I hope everybody listening's seen it, but for those who haven't, Thistle were awarded a penalty kick by the referee for handball by the match official. Now, we will get onto this debate, I'm sure, in a second. What I think I can categorically say that everybody will agree with was the ball quite clearly did strike his hand. The ball quite clearly was going towards goal. And the referee blew and gave that decision on field, and then VAR overruled that with the referee coming over to the monitor to see it. Now, for me as a Thistle fan, and I'll bring Cam in a second to your listeners, genuinely I've watched the replay so many times. I physically can't believe how it was overturned. To me, when I see it, I just see the ball being struck and the ball hitting the Hib player in the hand, his arm even bending back, and a penalty that was given should have been stood. Cam, I want to bring you in at this stage to kind of maybe give some balance or maybe correct me where I'm maybe going wrong with this or agree with me.
So I've watched the clip just over and over, just before the podcast there, just continuously watching it repeatedly. And the one thing I kept on repeatedly saying is I wish there was another angle. I don't know if there was another angle. I certainly hope that for there to be VAR at the game, that there was more than just that one single camera angle. And if they were just doing all the VAR from that, then that's pretty crazy. I don't know if the referee was watching that angle, because I don't. I have to think that it might look like it hits his leg first, like it touches along like the top of his leg, hits his hand, and then continues to go out. I don't know if that's what I'm seeing, or it's just because the camera's quite far away, they've zoomed in with it, so it's not massively super clear. Like, I would like a different angle, potentially from the other side, where you can see where the ball first starts moving, because from the angle that it's at, right behind it, right down the neck, it's tough to see whether it hits, because his knee's coming up and his hand's going down, and it just looks like there's a potential that it touches the leg first, but I couldn't say that for sure or not. And if that's the only angle that they're using, I think it's a madness that it was even allowed to be a VAR done game. But I might be wrong. They might have had other angles, so it's tough to say without having any of the actual facts.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, two things on that is, as we've heard numerous times about Scotland having VAR. I have always, listeners, to give you a wee bit of context, I done my whole university dissertation way back, God, whenever I finished uni, right?
Yeah.
Maybe 10 years ago or so, on why football should not bring VAR into the game. I done my whole uni dissertation on that, because even back then I was one of the pioneers that could see VAR was going to be useless, not one of these people that just says it in retrospective hindsight.
Yeah.
But Cam's touched on the greatest point of all. Scotland doesn't have proper VAR. Scotland has got the most diluted, watered down, cheap version of VAR there could possibly be. And I think you've touched upon the nail on the head there, Cam. We either have to have VAR, like we've seen in the upper echelons of football and top tier competitions. Like, I think we can all agree VAR in the World Cup was actually done fairly well.
Yes, I thought so. I didn't feel like there was any big, huge gaps while they analysed thousands and thousands of reels of data and 50 screens in front of them. But I'm sure all that was there, but they'd just done it rapid. There was hardly any big breaks in play for like minutes at a time, which you quite often see everywhere else where VAR's in operation. So it can be done.
Yeah, it can be done. And I think, in Scotland, we are a very, very, very passionate footballing nation. And for me, VAR has just brought in far more many problems than what it's solved.
Yeah,
we now have... But I was going to say, we now have a dedicated programme once a month with Willie Collum to go through every wrong VAR decision.
Yeah.
That's how bad it's got. So
Yeah.
I think we all have to get away from thinking VAR is this wonderful thing that we have to have, because we survived so long before without it. We either do it properly, or messes like what happened in Easter Road are going to rear their ugly head over and over and over again.
So I mean, the thing with VAR, I think when it's coming in, is the idea behind it is, well, it's going to make sure that we get every decision right, or every decision that should be made and be correct is. If a referee misses something, or the referee can't see it properly from his angle and it's actually worse than it looks, or there's so many uses where you think, okay, well, I mean, that sounds reasonable. You make sure that they're all correct. Like, I can live with that if I know for a certainty that that is now the correct decision. Then fair enough. Our player was in the wrong and we've been penalised for it because of this new fancy system. But it's like, it still comes down to the human making the decision at the end of it. You can have the best camera systems in the world and they still manage to get the decisions wrong, because they apply the rule slightly differently to the referee who applied that same rule the week before. And it blows your mind, where it's like, you have all this technology and computers and cameras to make sure that you catch everything and you can make the right decision, and you still apply the rule wrong and still make the wrong decision. And it blows my mind how poor it has been. And I agree, it should just go back to just let the referees and the assistants do their job, and sack the cameras in, and for their high cost to low result ratio, it's not really worth it.
No, not worth it at all. I completely agree, Camp, with every single word you said there. And I think the final point I'll make on this, and this is just sort of piggying back on your last point there, football's a game of opinions. It's why we love it. It's why we do this podcast, and it's why you're listening just now. I think the thing that kind of sickens me the most is every single person I've heard, every single person I've spoke to about the decision either says it was a stonewall penalty for Thistle, or VAR should never have intervened because it wasn't a clear and obvious error. And I'll just leave it at that because there's no more to say.
Yeah, it's done. It's in the past. It didn't work out. But yeah, that's football sometimes, isn't it? But that leads us on to the success story.
And I'm glad this is the last game.
It is. We'll all have seen that by this point, the fact that Stenhousemuir managed to knock Motherwell out, and they've progressed on to the next round of the Cup, 1-0 after extra time. What's happening there? What's going on in that game, Jack?
I don't know, Cam. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, you can say what you want, right? I've heard, Motherwell have rotated their team, and he's made too many changes, and they were in between European ties and focusing on Freiburg coming up and all this stuff. And yeah, you might say that. This was a Motherwell team that started with Maswanisi and Said.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't care what you're going to say. They had two of Motherwell's best players in their whole squad starting in that game, and Stenhousemuir can hold their heads so high after that.
100%.
Is it Ewan O'Reilly, 114 minutes in extra time? I think there was a wee bit of controversy though about this goal, Cam. I've seen a lot of screams from Motherwell saying that it was handball when he controlled it. You've seen numerous defenders react at the time, as well as a large section of the Motherwell crowd behind the goal. Nothing was given, obviously. No VAR in play at Oakview.
Yeah.
So, the goal stood. So, it's kind of swings and roundabouts here in football. We've seen one championship side fall to the wayside because of a decision. One championship side perhaps benefit from the technology not being in place. But all props to Marvin Bartley. It's been a truly outstanding start to the season for Stenhousemuir, topping the group that involved Livingston and Partick Thistle, and it, still being unbeaten after 2 matches in the Scottish Championship, and then following that up with a win against high-flying Motherwell. What can you say, Cam? It just doesn't get any better for that for Stenny just now.
Well, obviously, the people are saying, a rotated team and such. Yes, you're right for a chunk of the game. You look at the substitutions, 2 at half time. There must have been a concussion at some point because it looks like there's 6 substitutions per team. But you've got 2 players on at half time, 2 more players on at 62nd minute. And not, oh wait, sorry, it's an extra time substitution, of course.
Yeah,
You've
I was
got
going to say
another
extra
one
sub for
late
extra
on,
time.
and then the extra time sub. By the end of the game, it's a fairly standard Motherwell team that's on the pitch, and if 4 of the players have been on, for over half an hour, before extra time, and they've still not managed to score a goal. They've not managed to score a goal through the entirety of extra time against a part-time team. And it's pretty embarrassing for them. But like you say, it's not to be taking anything away from Stenhousemuir. They've done the business. They've got the goal. They've held on. And they've kept a clean sheet against, like you say, high flying Motherwell, doing well with a good squad, and they've really missed the boat on this one. They've not prepared appropriately, and they've suffered for it. Stenhousemuir have put them to the sword, and Motherwell fans maybe saying, "Oh well, Europe and all that stuff. We'll concentrate on that," but you still don't want to be losing to a team in the division below you, even if it's just a mentality thing. You don't want, at the very least, the players, dropping their heads or anything like that. You want to. This is an easy one. It should be to go out and get a big win to boost morale, and instead it's going to have the opposite effect.
Yeah, absolutely. It really, really is. It was a really poor result for Motherwell on the day, and you made a great point there, talking about their half-time substitutions and players like Fadinger coming on in the 60th minute, Regan Charles-Cook as well, Longelo, Lowry. It was a strong Motherwell team at the end if it wasn't at the start. So, yeah, fantastic result there for Stenny. And I want to touch for a second, Cam, on Marvin Bartley, because, he was obviously brought into the role this summer to replace Gary Naismith, who had done a truly excellent job at Stenny. And as we've touched upon, even in this podcast today, is already doing such an excellent job at Ayr. It was massive shoes to fill for Bartley coming into the role. And, if we are being truly honest, it was a guy who, didn't exactly have a glittering managerial CV. It was a not successful spell at Queen of the South.
Yeah.
Then he kind of, decent at Livy. Obviously then left under a massive cloud, after being, he said, promised a managerial position, then told to reapply. So a bit messy there. I kind of never really knew where my expectations were for him coming into the Stenny job, but he's certainly exceeding any expectations I had.
100%. Yeah, no, he's done absolutely fantastically so far. Now, let's be real for a moment. It's still early, but they've exceeded all expectations thus far. We'll see what happens as the season progresses on. Are they able to keep to that level, or do they start dropping away at some point? Do the other teams just, they're not quite up to speed yet? Who knows? We'll see. Hopefully, they maybe lose some of their steam quite quickly. There's games coming up this weekend. I don't know if you heard.
There's a big game this weekend involving Stenhousemuir for you, I think, isn't there?
It certainly is. Yeah, it certainly is. So I would really hope that they're going to have a blip, and they're going to have it soon. And then we'll make our decision about whether I like the manager or not. No, they have done fantastically. I just, for the sake of being a team who has generally been struggling the last few years, I'd like them to start struggling at some point.
Well, a question I'm going to pose to you right now, this is going to be really difficult, and I get this is so early on in the season, and I want you to just answer this question based on the potential of what you've seen so far and how you think the rest of this season could go. But based on what Arbroath done last season as being the promoted side, part-time in the league and doing so well, do you think Stenhousemuir can do as well or better this season?
I mean, when you look at it on the face of it, there's no reason to say that they couldn't. But I don't think they will. But there's no reason to say why not. I didn't think Arbroath would do it for most of the season last year, and they still managed to do it in the end. So maybe it'll be the same thing for me here. I don't think they'll do it, and maybe that means that they end up they will. Like I say, no reason why. It's just a feeling I've got. I don't think so, but again, I don't know if that's just the Queen's Park fan and me saying we want someone to be worse than us, please just be worse than us.
Well, that's a question, listeners, I want you to answer this week. I think this is the first time I've asked for a wee bit of engagement. So, listeners, if you are watching on YouTube, if you're watching on Spotify, get into the comments right now and let me know, will Stenhousemuir have a better season than what Arbroath did last season? Let me know, yes or no, and your reasoning behind it, because we do want to hear all of your comments. But Cam, I think that's enough League Cup action for 1 week. We've
true.
got some really, really important league fixtures to
Agreed.
talk about. And it's the Battle of the Thistles on Friday night as Inverness on the return to the Championship play Partick Thistle at home. Cam, on Friday night, on the telly, 7:30 kick-off, as you'll remember, for all of the Friday night games this season. How do you think this one's going to go for the Harry Rags up in the Highlands?
I don't know. I think it might be an interesting game, if not potentially a touch boring. As you know, Inverness aren't the easiest place to go to. Obviously, part to do with it being obviously quite far away. You know, usually maybe a bit colder. I suppose this time of year it's probably not going to be the biggest issue. Probably good to get them out of the way quite early on before the season start being a bit more of an impact. They're obviously the newly promoted team, but they're, you know, people think they're going to do quite well and we've got a good team and stuff. So I think it'll be a tough game. You know, maybe a bit of a slog at times. Obviously, Partick Thistle have the quality in their team to be able to go there and do the business. There's no question about that. It just, I suppose it depends, you know, how solid a display we see from Inverness on the night. I think for them it's going to be a case of hold on and score when possible, whereas obviously I would say you're going up there to attack from the offset and try and put as many goals in as possible. How
do you reflect on the stark contrast, Cam, of Inverness drawing their opening 2 league games 0-0 before having an 8-goal thriller against Hearts?
I don't think it really matters, because I suppose when you take the Premier League goals out of that, it's only 2 goals, you know. It's sure a little bit of system shock on the day for the Inverness fans. I don't expect them to be scoring many goals in this game, if I'm honest. And like I say, I think maybe it'll be a bit of a slog for yourselves. So probably not a high scoring game in this one, but you know, maybe it's just the championship. They've not quite worked out how to get the ball, you know, in the back of the net enough at the moment. So we'll see how they do. Friday night, obviously on the TV, everyone. So you should tune into that. BBC Scotland, 7:30. I take it you're obviously not making it up to the game in Inverness on a Friday night, no?
Nah, sadly not. I had a day kind of booked off in advance, and rather annoyingly, I had last Friday booked off well in advance. And if I knew the fixtures were going to be moved, you know, in hindsight, you would have obviously been this Friday off. But sadly, listeners, I won't be able to get away from work to make it up in time. So it'll just be a telly job. Watching it with your good self, hopefully on Friday night. So
I don't know.
We'll both be cheering on a victory for the red and yellow.
Yes. No, I don't know if I'll be doing cheering per se, but I'll certainly be watching happily with you, sure. Not necessarily not cheering. Certainly not cheering the opposite way, but you know, a reserved clap if you do manage to overdo the slog. But moving on, we've got Saturday games there also. First up, Morton against Arbroath. Morton being the home team in that one. Obviously going through their struggles at the moment. Just before we started the podcast, you brought up the Morton Fighting Fund. So do you want to give us a little dive into that?
Yeah, listeners. So I really feel as though, as you know, me and Cam have touched upon, you know, the sole Scottish Championship podcast out there. You know, we have the best listeners in Scottish football. We know how dedicated you are to us, and we're really, really, really thankful. Now, we've all got our rivalries in football. Thistle have got one with Morton as much as any other team in the league, but none of us can, and I think we can speak for everybody here. None of us would want to see our own team struggling.
No.
None of us would want to have the fear over our team potentially not being a football team anymore. And I think reading everything I've got in front of me, Cam, is that's the reality that Morton are at just now. And through the week, they launched the Morton Fighting Fund, which is they're calling a supporter-led initiative dedicated to protecting the future of their club. And, the statement's quite lengthy. I'm not going to read all of it.
Yeah.
They speak about they are for being more than over 150 years. The club's been, in existence, carried forward by generations of supporters, volunteers, players and staff. And they say, whilst results on the pitch matter and that the team will fight for every point, the long-term survival and sustainability of Green at Morton is what currently matters the most. And basically, they are basically putting their hand out and saying they need people's money.
Mm-hmm.
They need finances to survive, and essentially are asking people for voluntary donations. They're asking people to share the message, just to kind of gather some kind of traction on this. And by no means I'm sitting here saying go out there and put all your hard-earned money into keeping Green at Morton survive. Don't do that at all. But it's just to raise awareness of the plight of the situation, Cam. I was, young enough and just old enough to slightly remember the tail end of Save the Jags at the end of the 1990s, and hearing my dad and everybody talk about what a terrifying existence that was for Partick Thistle to potentially not survive past our financial woes. Glasgow Celtic had their issues in the 90s. Glasgow Rangers liquidated in the 2010s. So we all know that, football finances can affect clubs big and small. And, Morton, I just hope that this wee bit of publicity to what's going on down at Capel will help, because as much as, neither of us, Cam, I think, will say are Morton's biggest fans, you would hate to see them go out of business.
100%, and it's a bigger problem as well. We've seen it countless times in recent years. You've got Dumbarton, Hamilton, Inverness, all going through this little stretch of time where it looked like someone needs to step in and save the club, and these other clubs, thankfully for the time being, are still going and still functioning for the most part, and plodding on. Edinburgh City as well had more big problems. The state of Scottish football at the moment is finances are tight, and that goes for all teams, and it only takes one small issue to really start to spiral out of control. I mean, even if we maybe look at Morton, if you remember back to the Storm, January last year, and it obviously ripped a chunk of the cowshed roof off for Morton. That stand was shut for 4 weeks or so, partially opened at a certain point, and then obviously at some point they've had to shell out for the repairs to the roof. So while all that's going on, they're losing tickets for through the turnstile. Less people are coming in, not able to get into the cowshed. Then you've got to shell out for the presumably costly repairs, and then by that point, have you lost a few of maybe the more regulars who haven't been coming, and some people are patching it, and that's just one thing. You've still got an entire football team running in the background besides that's draining money as well. So it's tough, and you don't like to see it, but I can't help but think that institutionally there's a problem, and something needs to be done about it. Yes, at every single club at their own level, but higher up, someone has to be looking at this and saying, what's going on here? Why are all these teams struggling so hard? Is it poor management, or is there something worse of it here?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Cam. It's a stark point you make. You touched upon Inverness, Hamilton, Edinburgh City, Dumbarton. As you said, thankfully, all these clubs are still going just now. And we've touched on Inverness, back on their feet. I think Hamilton Accies, they're back in Hamilton now, Cam. They are, I think, actually back in their feet as well, which is great to see. I want to pick up on something I read about Morton through the week, or it was a comment from someone at Morton through the week who said, even when you take in the part-time teams in the league, Morton have apparently got the smallest budget out of everybody in their full-time. So, I mean, that's the issue.
Yeah.
Plain and simple, if we're going to talk football in terms, if you're a full-time team, operating on a less than part-time budget, you're just not going to do well.
Problems. Yeah.
It's- Yeah, you've got major. Now, I think the issue here is Morton have described it as cash flow issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's an
Take
issue
that
with
as
their
what you will.
sponsors. They're not. I think it's something to do with Dalrada, their shirt sponsor. I was reading something. So I don't know the details of it, so I don't want to sit here and spout things. But yes, it is to do with money not coming in that should have been coming in. And Dalrada was mentioned, so I can't help but imagine it's something to do with one or multiple of their sponsors not given the money that they were expecting.
Yeah, well, I've got absolutely no clue about any of that. I'm going to be honest. So, yeah, you're more in the knowledge with me on that, Cam. But whatever the issue is, it's just not a good one, is it? And we've spoken. We've not even spoken about Morton on the pitch yet because that's bleak enough for their fans. So the issue is with Morton on the pitch as well is not only are they obviously losing all of their games. They've not even scored a goal this season.
Yeah.
1-0 defeat at home against Linlithgow Rose, 2-0 defeat against East Fife, 3-0 defeat against St Johnstone, 1-0 against Inverness, 1-0 against Thistle, 2-0 against Stenhousemuir. I mean, you have to go back to the 26th of May to see the last time that Morton scored a goal.
Yeah.
You have to go back to the 11th of April to find the time Morton scored a goal away from home.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean,
it's
not
pretty
nuts.
reading, is it?
It's nuts, Cam. I mean, what do you say? I mean, they are not a team in a good place in any level.
I don't know what you can say. I think the only real thing that you have to say is, because we know there's not going to be any higher up support and help, you do just have to hope that someone, I don't know, some rich person from in and around the Greenock area, wants to come in and throw a lot of their own money at it. At the moment, it feels like, that's the main sort of way out. Yes, with all the fans clubbing together and doing their bit, it's certainly going to, keep the lights on, certainly for a while longer, but you've got to imagine there's got to be something slightly bigger than that, potentially. Not to say that Martin don't have a big support that would be willing to give everything they had for it, sort of thing, but is it enough to keep even a championship football team running in this day and age? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I think you've made a great point there, Cam. Is Morton do have a good support. They've got a real passionate core. Is what I would say. There's a real dedicated bunch of Morton fans who, I remember as much as you will, Morton being a third division club.
Yeah.
At one stage in the 2000s. So, let's not kid ourselves that we're talking about a giant collapse in here. It's not that at all. This is more about sustainability of football clubs at our level, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a question that's probably posed behind the scenes at more clubs than we probably hear coming out. So, yeah. So I think we've kind of said all we can at this stage, Cam, and it's not great for Morton, and obviously they've got Arbroath at home on Saturday, and what more can you say? I think the predictions will speak for themselves on that one.
Yeah.
So we'll leave it there. We've then got Livingston taking on Dunfermline at home. It's not the Tony Macaroni anymore, is it? I'm not sure what it's called nowadays.
It's the something stadium.
Yes, it's the something stadium. But
it's not the home of Set Fair, is it? Is it The home of Set Fair Arena.
The home of Set Fair Arena. We'll go for that. So
something
we will.
Like that.
Yes, the home of the Set Fair Arena is correct.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Cam. So so they're at the home of the Set Fair Arena to take on the disappointing.
The home of the Set Fair Arena. Sorry, I just need to take a wee minute. What even is that? The home of the Set Fair Arena. What?
That doesn't make any sense, does it?
Okay, sorry, I just had to take a wee second. Yeah, tough game for Dunfermline there, especially after the result that they had just at the weekend past there. Are they able to turn it around? It's a rough one to come back into league action away to the team who's just been relegated from the division above, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, though. I will say, I mean, we're in the kind of fortunate position, if you like, that Livingston have played 2 games this season both against our two sides, Cam. I mean, I must say, I was incredibly. Well, I was pleased to see how poor Livingston were, if I'm being honest. But from a neutral footballing perspective, I was incredibly disappointed with Livingston on the night because when they played Thistle at Firhill, they were awful. As much as Thistle were fantastic, there was no real style of play from Grenwhelan's side, and all the kind of concerns I had about his lack of managerial experience was kind of sort of there. And a couple of the Thistle pals I've got even said that he called us Dunfermline twice in his post-match interview, which obviously isn't a great look. So it's an interesting one. I think this is as big a game for Livingston as it is for Dunfermline just now, Cam. I think with Thistle playing on the Friday night, if Thistle get a victory in Inverness, as early as it is, there's a bit of pressure on Livingston to go out there and not make that gap remain at 6 points.
For sure. The one thing I will say about Livingston, though, when they were in the division the last time at least, is I don't feel like they ever really looked that great. They never really, I felt like they played good football or completely dominated matches, and that's why they won, and they won well and stuff like that. They just managed to eke out results most games and just continued on, just not pumping teams, not absolutely demolishing teams, just winning 2-1 and 3-2 and 1-0. And if they can do that again this year, then there's no reason that they can't be in and around there. But you're right, if Partick Thistle are playing the way that they were towards the end of last season, do Livingston have that opportunity to have a slow start? Do they have to be on it from the get-go? I suppose the question is, to you as a Partick Thistle fan, how many games do you think Thistle are going to lose this year?
That's a very good question. If you were going to put me on the spot, I'd say a handful.
Yeah. So, around 5. Livingston already 1. So I suppose we'll keep an eye on their L number. If it crawls up, we've got to imagine that if Partick Thistle are as good as you're hoping they're going to be for the rest of the season, then trouble. Starting this weekend, like you say, that it does make this game a big one for them. A tough opposition, looking to turn around from a poor result of the weekend. They might have a problem here, definitely.
Yeah, I think it's a huge game. The more I think about it, I'm really looking forward to seeing how it goes on Saturday for the two sides. But Cam, there's another massive game here, and that's Queen's Park against Stenhousemuir. I don't need to tell you. Give us a wee bit of context, Cam, as to what's going on in this fixture.
Well, first off, big fans of Stenhousemuir. They let us share their stadium, Ochilview. And I loved my time at Ochilview for sure. It felt nice. I think obviously being used to playing in Hampden, going to a smaller stadium where you actually fill out the stand and there's like a bit of atmosphere and stuff, it felt nice, and it's where I sort of had my first season ticket and returning. So I like that Stenhousemuir's back in the league, and it's nice to be playing them at our ground this time. However, they've started very well, and they look really good, and they just beat Motherwell, and I would, as I mentioned earlier on the podcast, as a Queen's Park team who's struggled for the last few seasons, maybe slightly less so last year, but definitely large periods where it was looking rough, I would like to beat the teams that have just been promoted. And the more and more I look at this game on Saturday there, the more and more I worry about it. I look at Stenhousemuir's results and how we've played, which hasn't been super fantastic. Certainly moments, but just not quite at that level. I worry about it. I definitely worry. I'll obviously be there and I'll be screaming on for Queen's Park there. But Stenhousemuir certainly have something going for them at the moment, and I hope they don't bring it with them on Saturday.
And I'm going to pose the exact same question I just posed about Livingston here. How vital is it for Queen's Park to even, you could say, pick up the win on Saturday and not lose against Stenhousemuir, to let that gap become 7 points between the two yourselves after 3 games if they pick up the win?
I don't think it's vital. It's still the third game of the season. It's seemingly a trend of recent years that Queen's Park start poorly, horribly, and then crawl their way back up through the season. Obviously, you don't want to bank on that. You don't want to say, "Oh, it's fine. We don't need to win now because we'll start winning later." We would love to win on Saturday, and we'd love to stop Stenhousemuir pulling away from us. But at the end of the day, if Stenhousemuir are going to be good, then it's irrelevant. We've got to look at the Martins and the Arbroaths and the Invernesses, who are currently the closest teams to us. This league's going to evolve and it's going to change and it's going to morph around. So no, this game isn't vital. We would love to win and we would love to start the home record going again, but it is what it is. If we don't win, it'll suck, but it's not game over. We'll come back.
Any updates on the transfer front for Queen's Park?
I don't think so. No, not anything that I've seen. It's more at the moment looking at loans out rather than players in. You never know. There's certainly scope for maybe a couple of players coming in. I would certainly feel a bit more comfortable if there was, but at the moment, as far as I've seen, there's not really much kicking about in terms of Queen's Park news. But you never know. The manager might be working on a few things in the background, phoning a load of players that he's used to play with or has coached at some point and seeing if they want to come and play for him again. Who knows?
Yeah. So yeah, again, a big game down at Leicester on Saturday, Cam, one you'll be looking forward to. So I'm excited to hear about your kind of take on that on next week's podcast. But arguably, Cam, the games just keep getting better. What a card that is this weekend. Wraith Rovers against Ayr United. Obviously, you saw Wraith Rovers play against Queen's Park a couple of weeks ago, so you've already kind of had first-hand experience of seeing them this season. How do you think that's going to go? We've obviously been, high praising of Ayr this season, but Wraith are sitting there on 4 points, the same as Ayr after 2 games this season. How do you see it going up at Starks?
I thought they were disappointing. Some people may have seen it. Obviously, we lost the game through a handball penalty from Ricky Lamy, where I don't know if he thought he was maybe the goalkeeper.
That was
or
awful,
something like that. But yeah, he just decides to raise his hand up into the air and give away a penalty. And we came close a few times to equalising. And I can't help but think things would have been different had Ricky Lamy not Supermaned himself into the ball. But they weren't an impressive team. It wasn't a given that they were going to win because they were so good. Like, if anything, we were just not particularly good, still not quite found our stride. So I think it might be a struggle based on what I've seen of Ayr so far. They're obviously doing well, and they were unlucky obviously at the weekend, but they performed very well. So I think Ayr are going into this with the momentum. Both of them sitting there on 4 points, but I don't think Wraith will be there come the end of the weekend.
No, interesting take, Cam. Interesting take. I'm gonna leave that as is till we got on the predictions. But yeah, I'm interested to see what you're gonna go for in that game.
Well, we're going into the predictions now. Basically, are we not? That is the last game.
Yeah, well, that is the last game. So let's do predictions. So we still got the ones from the weekend of the 8th of August to review.
We have to review. It's review time, so I'm just adjusting my microphone. For now, I'm on my tablet. Right. So last week, we'll just jump straight into it. There was a Friday night game. Last week, game week. Thistle against Livy on the television. You had Thistle down for a 2-1 victory. I had them down for a 1-0 victory. Obviously, it ended up 2-0, so we both get 2 points there. Arbroath against Inverness. I had thought that you had gotten this one correct. Unfortunately for you, you had 1 each down, not 0-0. I had Arbroath to win 2-1, so no points for me, 2 for yourself. Next game up, Dunfermline Ayr. We both took Dunfermline to win 1-0. It was obviously 1 each. Queen's Park against Wraith Rovers. I had the inverse of the result, 2-1 Queen's Park. You had 2-2. So no points, not looking good. For the last game, Stenny against Martin, you had this down for a 1-1 draw, and I had Stenny down for a 2-0 win. which
Oh, you're joking.
obviously
So
it
even though you
was.
obviously... I hate this game.
So you are still in the lead by 1 point. You got 8 in the first week, and I got 4, and I got 7 this week, and you got 4. So it's tightened it right back up there. So we're now into the next week. I think you done it last week, I believe. Did you? Do you remember?
Remember.
Well, I'll do it this week anyway first. So Inverness against Thistle up next. A game that I think is going to be a bit of a slog, as I mentioned. But I think you're still going to win 2-0.
Yeah, I'm going to back the boys in this one. I think it's going to be really difficult. I was toying with the idea of going for a draw, but Inverness can't draw every game this season.
It's true.
So I'll back the boys and I'll say 2-1 Thistle.
No problem, that's locked in. Next up, Morton against Arbroath. I think this is going to be 1-0 Arbroath.
Yeah, so I obviously tried to give Morton a wee bit of credit last week.
Yeah.
And I'll stick with it, right? I'm going to try and be positive for Morton.
Yeah.
I'm going to say they're going to get a positive 0-0.
Positive 0-0. See, I did think 0-0 first of all, but feeling Arbroath a wee bit there. Next up, we've got Livingston against Dunfermline. I think this one is going to be a 1-1 draw. I don't think either team is going to have enough to take the victory there.
I agree. Put me down for a 1-1 draw as well.
1-1 draw on that one also. Perfecto. Next up, Queen's Park against Stenhousemuir. Now, Stenhousemuir have obviously been playing very well. Much better than us. We've not been playing well. But the manager keeps on talking about home form and wanting it to be really good. So I'm going to back us here, and I'm going to say 2-0.
2-0. I mean, it's
Crazily.
a difficult game to predict. Well, it's a difficult game to predict, Cam. One thing I will say is, how often do you see teams come off the back of a great big result and then, fly back to reality in the next game, So I don't think it's outlandish to predict a Queen's Park win, but I'm going to say 1 each.
1 each, no problem. That is locked in there. Last game up, Wraith Rovers against Ayr United. I think Wraith's going to struggle here. I really do. And I think Ayr United are going to win 2-1.
I knew you were going to go for an Ayr win, and I actually completely disagree. I think this is where we are going to see Ayr United just have a small bump in the road. It's been really plain sailing for Gary Naismith so far, but as I said for Inverness, Ayr aren't going to go the whole season unbeaten, far from it. And I think this is going to be one of the hiccups. I'm going to say 2-1 Wraith Rovers.
Nice wee inverse result there. So Inverness against Thistle. We've both taken a Thistle victory. You've went 2-1, I've went 2-0. Morton against Arbroath. You've taken 0-0 there. I've got Arbroath to win that one 1-0 away. We've both taken a 1-0 draw in the Livy Dunfermline. Queen's Park against Stenny. I've went for a 2-0 victory for the boys, and you've went for a 1-0 draw. And then we've both went inverse results on the last one, Wraith against Ayr. We've both taken 2-1. I've got Ayr, you've got Wraith.
Absolutely. And listeners, this is your time to get involved. We really hope you have been playing along at home. So if you have, let us know how many points you've got after the opening 2 game weeks, or if you want to wait until your predictions come in for the games on Saturday, you can message us in on Sunday or Monday ahead of next week's episode and let us know how you're sitting after game week 3. But what we can even do, if you want, is create a wee table that's got Cam's score, my score, and then your score, and it can be all involved with all of the listeners. So if you want to get involved with that, then do let us know in the comments. Your preferred method is yours.
Yeah, perfect. That is the end of the podcast now. As always, we finish up with the predictions. So we'll bid you farewell. Thank you all very much for listening again to us rabble on for presumably far too long. For all of you who have listened on till this point, thank you very much. We appreciate it, and we'll see you again next week.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, guys and girls. Give us a like, give us a share, tell your friend about us. More importantly, enjoy whatever game you're going to, and we'll catch you for next week's episode.